Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending where we are on the globe. Welcome to this webinar. It's great to have you all here with us today. My name is Gabriel Lazari. I'm an international consultant at UNIDO. I'm also the executive superintendent at the Brazilian Hydrogen Association, and I was the project leader for the ISO TS 19870 during the year of 2023. So we are here today to discuss something very important for the hydrogen sector, that is the guide to the ISO TS 19870 and the TS 19870 itself. So this work was a joint effort by UNIDO and ISO, and it promotes harmonization and transparency when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions in the hydrogen value chain by highlighting the use of the ISO's technical specification. So before we start, let me walk you through our today's agenda. We'll start with welcome remarks by Ms. Petra Schreger. She is the Chief of the Climate and Technology Partnership Division at UNIDO. Then we have welcome remarks by Ms. Noelia Garcia Nebra. She's the Head of Sustainability at ISO. And then we will dive into the main presentation of the guide on the ISO TS 19870. And during this presentation, we will feature a contribution from our guest speakers. Those are Mr. Laurent Anthony, he is the Executive Director at the IPHE, Ms. Daria Nochevnik, she's the Director for Policy and Partnerships at the Hydrogen Council, and Mr. Maximilian Kahn, who is the Advisor at Hydrogen Europe. So towards the end of this webinar, if we still have some time, we will open the floor for a Q&A session where you can engage directly with us, with me, and with the other panelists. You should probably be able to see a button for the Q&A in your Teams. So feel free to put on questions over there. That's where we will gather our questions. And before we begin, I'd like to emphasize this strong partnership between UNIDO and ISO, which has been very instrumental in creating initiatives such as this one. UNIDO and ISO partnership spans for over 40 years, and it's fostered by the synergies of both institutions when it comes to sustainable industrialization, reducing trade barriers, and working towards the sustainable development goals. I'd also like to thank our reviewers for this work. Those are Ms. Petra Schreger, Maria Sandivki-Vist, she is the head of strategic partnerships at ISO, Laurent Anthony, Andrei Chivlev, who is the director for safety and regulations at the Hydrogen Council, Maximilian Kahn, Amgad El-Gowani, he's the senior scientist at Argonne National Laboratory, and Emily Yednak, she's the senior technical analyst at Coloma. Okay, so without further ado, please let me invite Ms. Petra Schweger, Chief of Climate Change and Technology Partnership Divisions at UNIDO, to share a few words with us today. Ms. Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Let me also express my thanks to, first of all, to ISO for the great collaboration, and then for all the reviewers that have been so kind to review our guide. The guide is extremely important for us as UNIDO because, as some of you might know, we have initiated a global program for hydrogen in industry that is very much aligned with the mandate of UNIDO to bring forward an inclusive and sustainable industrial development as a means to fight poverty and bring additional wealth and economic growth to developing world. So in this way of thinking, we have also structured our global hydrogen program around seeing hydrogen and seeing clean hydrogen or low emissions hydrogen as a means to build up new industrial development, new sustainable and low carbon industrial development in countries that are producing it and in the global south. Of course, we all know that low emissions hydrogen is essential for the decarbonization, and the decarbonization is mainly happening in industrialized countries. But we see also the merit of local application and fostering industrial growth in the global south, and through this creating also new jobs. And I think we all know that the future jobs lay in the new energy sectors, so we are very much driving this. In our program, we decided to have two pillars. So one pillar is the global partnership pillar, and I see many friends here that we have already signed partnership agreements. One is the Hydrogen Council, of course, ISO, but also with IPHE and Hydrogen Europe, where with these partners we are developing knowledge products and in regarding key enablers for low emissions hydrogen. And these are ranging from policy, capacity building, new technologies, innovation, and standards are crucial, a crucial part of this. Standards are essential that we can drive not only a local development, but also a fair trade, a trade that leaves no country behind, a trade of hydrogen, of low emissions hydrogen that really considers everybody, and that we know what we're buying, what we are selling. So without clear standards, this is impossible. And so we have teamed up with ISO on the guide. We subscribe to the new guidelines for greenhouse gas emissions embedded in the production of hydrogen as a means to measure the environmental impact of hydrogen. Personally, I think this is even more important as we see that many countries are now coming up and developing their own standards. And if these standards are not aligned with a global standard, it will be very, very difficult to connect. And many countries might even spend a lot of efforts in developing a standard that will then not yield the results that they aim to have. We are then having, as I mentioned before, the partnership approach, and we are bringing what we are developing with our partners to our technical cooperation program that we are having at the moment with 12 countries. Ranging from South Africa, Egypt, Ecuador, Brazil. So just to name a few where we are working with the government on advancing just hydrogen transition. I think I will not take more of your time and just pass on the floor to our partner from ISO for the next welcome remark. And thank you once again for the great collaboration. And Gabriel, you did an outstanding job. Great to have you in our team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra. Just a few words before we pass the floor to Ms. Noelia. Yeah, what you just said is something that we see every day. This need for standards, the need for harmonization to make the market growth. I think that we are in a pivotal moment for the hydrogen industry, where we do have the technology, we do have the public will, and we do have the need for the climate change, and hydrogen is instrumental for doing it, but we need to do it right. We need to do it in a harmonized way. So yeah, I reverberate very much with what you said. Okay, so let me just pass the floor to Ms. Noelia Garcia. She's the head of sustainability at ISO, to share her perspectives on this partnership and on this work. Ms. Noelia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Petra. It's really a pleasure. Good day, everyone. And well, my sincere gratitude, of course, to UNIDO, not only for organizing this seminar, which is very important, but for the productive and enduring cooperation between ISO and UNIDO. I believe that this session will provide a very valuable platform to raise awareness about ISO's work to define a methodology for determining GHG emissions of hydrogen technologies, which is a key milestone in advancing the global hydrogen economy and supporting the energy transition, as Petra just mentioned. Hydrogen is undeniably a cornerstone of the global energy transition. It holds tremendous potential to decarbonize industries, enable clean energy systems, and drive sustainable development. However, to realize this potential, as we were just mentioning, you, Gabriel, as well, requires really international standards that provide clear, consistent guidance and ensure transparency across the value chain. And that's what we think the critical step that the ISO Technical Specification, I will avoid the numbers, now we all know which document we are talking about. We believe this document provides a critical step, and thank you to all the partners involved, Hydrogen Council and others here in this call today for the support here. So this document that was launched at COP28 enhances transparency, as I was mentioning, and comparability in the hydrogen market by offering a standardized methodology to assess greenhouse gas emissions across the hydrogen value chain. We will get into the details in a bit. And by doing that, it supports informed decision making, facilitates the harmonization of policies, and strengthens cross-border trade, as you just mentioned. And importantly, it complements other ISO standards on environmental assessment management, greenhouse gas emissions measurements, and others. But the importance of this document goes beyond technicalities. We saw last year at COP28 that it serves as the foundation for the Intergovernmental Declaration of Intent on mutual recognition of certification schemes from hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, another very important document signed by 30 ministerial officers during COP, and that will actually help the trade of around hydrogen, and it reflects the collective commitment for mutual recognition and collaboration around hydrogen. I think that seminars like the one today to raise awareness about this standard are really critical to accelerate the adoption of this document, but also the adoption of those technologies, to make it this document hopefully more accessible and more user-friendly. And here we welcome the collaboration with UNIDO. Thank you, Gabriel, for developing this very comprehensive guide, which introduces the technical specification and highlights its practical applications, ensuring that stakeholders across the hydrogen value chain can actually understand and implement its requirements effectively. I believe that the collaboration between ISO and UNIDO, and I was in an event around that at COP29 also with other partners, is really important. Developing those documents, those international standards that bring fiscality, but also around capacity building initiatives, so that we can empower developing countries to participate actively in the hydrogen economy. We all know the importance of that for developing countries and their energy transition. These programs will ensure that no country is left behind in this transformative journey, and that standards development processes remain inclusive and representative of all voices. So looking ahead, we will build in this document, in this technical specification, to develop additional, actually international standards, looking specifically at the different elements of the value chain, transportation, production, consumption, etc. And with that, I just want to conclude by wishing everyone, of course, a very interesting webinar. I hope you will find it of value, and by reiterating, of course, my gratitude to UNIDO and all the other partners for this indispensable work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Noelia. I have been part of ISO since 2023. I was the project leader for this TS. I am the project leader now for the -1. And I have been part of the ABNT, that is the national standards body in Brazil, since maybe 2 years before that. And I can say comfortably that this document is very much important for the industrialization of the word. It goes back to one of the goals of the creation of ISO in 1947, to reindustrialize the word, to rebuild the word. And yeah, I really think that this is a very important document that we are going through right now. And yeah, thank you so much for the words. So moving on, we do have the presentations. I'd like to start it. You can see my screen, right? Okay, so let's move towards the presentation. There's a QR code here that points to the guide itself. I hope that everyone has had the chance to look at it. But just moving forward. Okay, so starting with some contextualization for the hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. Well, climate change may be the biggest challenge of the 21st century. It's not a problem of the future anymore. This is something that we feel every day. This is something that affects our lives. And hydrogen has the potential to mitigate the climate change. It might be not the only solution, but it probably is one of the most important ones. That's because hydrogen has this potential to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors, as well as develop economies and well, developed countries. And well, hydrogen is not new in the world. Actually, the world produces and consumes a lot of hydrogen, but most of this produced hydrogen is not low emission hydrogen. It's hydrogen produced with high carbon quantities. Actually, in the year of 2023, about 97 million tons of hydrogen was produced, but only, or actually less than 1% of all this hydrogen was actually low emission hydrogen. And I'd like to bring a few numbers over here. In 2021, the global average of emissions for hydrogen was around 12 to 13 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilograms of hydrogen. That means that each kilogram of hydrogen produced emitted about 12 to 13 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And considering the IEA net zero scenario for 2050, we should lower this average global emissions to 6 to 7 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen in 2030 and reach less than 1 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen in 2050. And it goes to this chart on the right here that shows many different technologies and sources for producing hydrogen, and in the horizontal axis, the emissions associated with those technologies. And what I'd like to highlight is that all technologies are able to produce hydrogen with low CO2 emissions. Of course, if you produce hydrogen like hydrogen was produced 100 years ago, it has emissions associated with 100 years ago. But if you produce hydrogen with modern technologies using high rates of carbon captures or using renewable energies, hydrogen can be produced sustainably with low emissions, and it's important, and all technologies are important for the energy transition. And moving to for this picture here on the right side, I hope you can see my pointer. Yes. So, but how can we ensure a fair and consistent comparison of hydrogen produced across different technologies, different sources, and different batches of hydrogen? And then I brought this picture to raise this question: how much is one apple plus a star plus a chess piece? Well, it actually doesn't make much sense. But if we sum an apple with another apple and another apple, then it suddenly makes a lot of sense. So this is a concept that is not exclusive to ISO, but it's the apple to apples concept, in which two things can only be compared if they have the same nature, if they have the same basis. And this is where this methodology comes from. So the ISO TS 19870 is a unified, internationally recognized framework for quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions in the hydrogen supply chain up to the consumption gauge. So the work of this technical specification started in ISO in 2023, but actually this document started way before in IPH in 2019, I believe, with almost the same name associated with the hydrogen onto the production gauge. And during this step in 2023 in ISO, this document served as the basis for this technical specification, along with the family of our LCA standards, ISO LCA standards. So all in all, this document fosters the international hydrogen trade and development by providing regulatory certainty, policy signals, market growth and transparency. It is a technology agnostic approach because it focuses on quantifying the greenhouse gas emissions across diverse pathways, and it represents the first step towards establishing a family of ISO standards for partial CFP in the hydrogen supply chain. So I have a slide on partial CFP later, but first I'd like to raise this question. What are the benefits of standardizing greenhouse gas emissions assessment using this technical specification, using the ISO TS 19870? And to help us with this answer, I'd like to invite Mr. Laurent Anthony, who is the Executive Director for the IPHE. Mr. Laurent Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Yes, I think that the main question, why do we need this kind of standard? I think you already mentioned that a little at the introduction speech, but if you go back to the history, everyone wants now to move to clean or to low emission hydrogen. Why? Just in order to decarbonize our economies. And we know that from hydrogen, some countries will produce more than consume, and others will consume more than they can produce. So this means we will need international trade of low emission hydrogen. So this means that we need to create a hydrogen economy to decarbonize our economies. And of course, that means that we need to agree on what low emission hydrogen means. And this is exactly that we are using sometimes some colors, but I think we should all be colorblind. What matters is the carbon footprint. And that's why we need to agree how to measure, how to quantify the greenhouse gas emission from hydrogen we want to use in order to decarbonize our economies. And that was, of course, one easiest way is to certify that the hydrogen we are using is really low emission. But then we still have to agree on the value to quantify how low emission it is. And of course, you may have been seeing that many countries have already developed their own methodology. But as you mentioned before, the system boundary used for these quantification are not always the same. Some are going from well to production gate, other goes from well to consumption gate. Some are using different assumptions on upstream emissions. And so, of course, we cannot overrule existing regulations. But where the ISO can really have a big advantage is to, at least for countries who have not already developed such kind of methodology, to consider to use this methodology to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions. And then for those who already have put in place their own methodology, this will enable, I would say, a translator or comparator telling that, look, okay, if we would use the ISO methodology, that would be the carbon footprint of this hydrogen. And so this may be then useful for everyone, as much as either to become part of the regulation and the official methodology, or at least to use a translator as a comparator in order to really be able to compare between importing and exporting countries. So that's why IPHE, as you mentioned, have started this work in 2019. Because we had in mind this certification aspect, but IPHE is not a standardization body. So for us, it was really obvious that the only organization is the ISO. And that's why we were so happy to hand it over to ISO. And I'm also have the honor to continue to convene this specific working group with you, Gabriel. So I hope that you may see and the benefits of this standardization, but I think very important, and this is in particular for countries already having regulation, or for exporting countries to countries having this regulation. ISO standard is a voluntary technical standard and will never overrule existing regulations. But we hope that over time, ISO will become a universal accepted methodology. But this not everywhere from now, but we hope as soon as possible. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Lohan, for the very comprehensive answer. I do have another question, but I'd like to go one ahead because I'd like to make a link with what you just said. Let me just go to this one. Yes, how are different regions looking at ISO TS 19870 to harmonize the accounting of greenhouse gas emissions in the hydrogen supply chain? And this is something that you maybe touch a little bit on. And I can speak about the Brazilian side. I'm from Brazil, and Brazil just had its hydrogen legal framework released in this second semester of 2024, and we are now working on our hydrogen certification schemes, our national hydrogen certification schemes, that will use ISO TS 19870 as its basis. So this is a pretty young technical standard, but this is something that is helping shape the regulatory framework of countries that are still developing their national standards. And well, I'd like to ask to Mr. Maximilian, how do you perceive this technical specification being used in the European Union? How does the hydrogen in Europe see this technical specification be used to harmonize this sector?
Thanks, Gabriel. I hope you can hear me. So
yes.
We are very happy to be part of this process, and we are also looking forward that this standard will come out towards this time next year, I hope. We also see that the standard is being developed as a European standard, or will become a European standard, maybe with some annex documents, but in general aligned with the agreement between ISO and CEN. So that is good. Like Laurent said, the regulation cannot be changed by a standard, but it provides a baseline, and the regulation will also be reviewed before 2028. So the European Commission already indicates the report of the Court of Auditors, the Draghi report, and the 2040 targets report. They all indicate that we are not achieving what we intended with our goals for hydrogen. So that makes it very clear that maybe a revision of of the regulation should come before 2028, and the legal text gives the possibility to do this before 2028. So in von der Leyen's yesterday's statement, there's also some indications, and we hope to see some adaptations to make the hydrogen sector thrive. So we hope that maybe something will be changed in the future to give the market the uptake it needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maximilian. The European Union is a very important market for hydrogen technologies, and for hydrogen consumption as well. And it's good to see that there's a harmonization pathway using the standards and using the regulations that are already in place. So I think that we can see the pieces of the jigsaw being put together right over there.
But
so
just one sentence, maybe. So from our perspective, and also a lot of European contributors contributed to the standard, so it's very much aligned, I think, with international.
Thank you so much for that. So let me bring you back to Ms. Daria and for the private sector. Ms. Daria, I'd like to ask you the role of the ISO TS 19870 for global investors regarding the global hydrogen trade and the deployment of new projects, and also if you can touch a little bit on how the context of this TS was launched in the last COP28, and how does the Hydrogen Council see this?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And as many of you know, the Hydrogen Council is a global coalition of CEOs that represents industrial leaders in hydrogen around the world, from Europe and Middle East to the Americas, Asia Pacific and Africa. And we have been really delighted to have our close collaboration with UNIDO, as well as with the ISO, the Central Secretariat, as well as the TC 197 Subcommittee 1. And first of all, congratulations on the fantastic work that has been done by yourself, Gabrielle, our colleagues, Laurent, of course, the groundwork that has been laid by the governments in IPHE to inform the development of this technical specification. We believe it's absolutely critical, and so is the guide that is being launched today, as indeed an effort to make sure that the standard is more accessible to the wider community of experts and professionals. As mentioned by Noelia already, indeed, the technical specification was launched as part of the inaugural presidential action agenda of the COP28 presidency of UAE. So it really formed a milestone in international cooperation in hydrogen and standards development. It builds on years of collaboration between dozens of experts around the world, grounded in scientific rigor, and it really represents, I think, a very hard-earned consensus, global consensus on GHG emissions assessment for hydrogen on a life cycle analysis basis, which is very much welcomed by the community, covering, of course, the industrial leaders, but also global investors. As mentioned by Laurent, while countries may be adopting varied approaches to hydrogen deployment based on their unique national circumstances, this technical specification really serves as a unifying basis. So it fosters transparency and provides that common foundation for governments and industries, enabling that coordinated effort to help us build global cross-border supply chains for hydrogen. And of course, that methodology and common understanding, common way of assessing the emissions is crucial to build consumer trust, informing certification schemes. And I think that step that has been taken by Brazil is very welcome, and it provides already a good practice internationally of using the TS 19870 to inform the development of national certification instruments, because these will be critical to support bankable offtake, build that investor trust and consumer confidence in the hydrogen that they are off-taking and ultimately committing to deploy. There is, I think, a very clear global consensus that has been reflected in the latest intergovernmental initiatives, G7, most recently G20 in Brazil, COP28, as well as the latest COP29, that we really need to proceed with the adoption of robust international standards for greenhouse gas emissions assessment for hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives. And as you mentioned, Gabrielle, they form the vital backbone and the foundation for the development of the global industry. And I think the latest IEA report that was produced to support the G20 presidency of Brazil highlighted that ultimately, policies should reward better GHG emissions performance and drive that continuous improvement over time. It pointed to the need for the use of GHG emissions assessment and abatement value as the backbone for policy design and designs of the incentives for hydrogen derivatives. And to deliver that, of course, the global ISO standards in the 19870 series are absolutely vital. Basically, they can serve as the foundation to inform these policy frameworks, incentive schemes that then reflect the greenhouse gas emissions abatement value of hydrogen, different pathways and different hydrogen derivatives. So we very much look forward to continuing our collaboration with the ISO, with UNIDO, and supporting the development of this whole suite of standards covering hydrogen production, conditioning and conversion to hydrogen carriers and their transportation to consumption gate, including liquid hydrogen, ammonia, and LOHC. We know that the first standard is due to be published already next year, followed by the other two standards targeted for publication in 2026. We do believe that this is an absolutely critical global effort, and we look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you, and back to you, Gabrielle.
Thank you so much, Daria. I think it was, well, we mentioned lots of very important stuff, but two things that were highlighted in my mind was that yeah, this technical specification works as an international benchmark for comparing different certifications or different standards for hydrogen, better saying. And this technical specification may be used as a basis for a certification scheme to unlock incentives. So this is something that is very important for national industries, and this is something that we're living right now in Brazil. So yeah, those are the things that caught my attention more in what you said. But thank you so much. So okay, we are moving then into the presentation of the guide. For starters, this was a guide that was developed by UNIDO in partnership with ISO and with support from IPG, the Hydrogen Council and the Hydrogen Europe that are here with us. And the purpose of the guide is to make the ISO TS 19870 more accessible to practitioners, industry professionals, and governmental stakeholders. So the role of this guide is to complement and explain the technical specification, and it's not meant to be a standalone document, whereas it's more meant to be a document that supports the ISO TS 19870. So the best way to use this guide is to have the ISO TS 19870 with you, to be used to it, to be accustomed to it, and then read this guide with this TS in hand, consulting this TS. So the guide makes reference to the sections of the TS 19870 while distributing them in the 4 phases of the LCA, the life cycle assessment, per ISO family of standards too. Okay, so before we start, I'd like to highlight the difference of carbon footprint of a product or life cycle assessment, and better yet, to tell what they are. Well, actually, this technical specification is a specification for the carbon footprint of a product, this product being the hydrogen produced. And why it's not a life cycle assessment? Well, life cycle assessment is a much more broader context, a much more broader concept that encompasses other environmental aspects that is not just the climate change. So for example, water consumption, resource depletion, ozone depletion, particulate matter emission, and of course, climate change. So carbon footprint of a product is a special case of the life cycle assessment, and this is what this methodology proposes to do, to assess the carbon footprint of this product. And it does so by evaluating the emissions from the raw material extraction, so from the first step in getting all these materials from the hydrogen until they deliver it at the consumption gate. So the step of consuming this hydrogen is outside of the scope of this technical specification, but the steps of the production, conditioning, conversion, and transport of this hydrogen are all inside the scope of this methodology. And another concept that is also important to highlight is the concept of partial carbon footprint of a product. The carbon footprint of a product is the whole system that is encompassed inside your system boundary, and it can be subdivided into different stages that can be called partial carbon footprint of a product, such as, for example, the production of hydrogen, just the production of hydrogen. So in this table, I highlight some of the important goals, so important aspects of each one of the ISO phases, ISO LCA phases, when applied to the CFP. So for example, for the first phase, that is the goal and scope definition. For the CFP, it establishes the study's purposes, defines the system boundaries, and defines the functional unit, among others, of course. For the second phase, the life cycle inventory analysis, it collects and organizes data on greenhouse gas emissions across the selected stages or segments of this product's life cycle. For the life cycle impacts assessment, it calculates the greenhouse gas emissions in kilograms of CO2 equivalent using the global warming potential coefficient and the data obtained in the previous phase. And then there's the interpretation phase where it conducts sensitivity analysis, performs critical reviews, and reports the results. Okay, so going into the first phase, that is the goal and scope definition guidelines. So this is the foundation phase for a CFP assessment. One thing that is important to highlight here is that this phase may be refined due to the results that will be obtained in the following phases. So for example, when doing your sensitivity analysis in the interpretation phase, you may want to change the scope, you may want to change some of the aspects of this first phase. And this is okay, this is a very dynamic process. It might happen. So the goal of this standard is to calculate the CFP for hydrogen from the raw material extraction to the consumption gate. And it does so by having a main body with general guidelines that may be applicable to all the different pathways for hydrogen, and annexes, informative annexes that bring guidelines for different hydrogen production, conditioning, and conversion pathways. And here I'd like to bring the difference of informative to normative in ISO terms. So informative, as the name says, they are a piece of information that are given to the reader to bring more context or to bring general ideas on a topic. Whereas normative means that those information have to be followed to be compliant with a set standard or technical specification. So in the case of this technical specification, the annexes are informatives. And there's the difference of conditioning and conversion. Excuse me. So conditioning deals with changing the physical properties of this hydrogen. So for example, pressurizing this hydrogen and liquefying this hydrogen, and conversion is actually changing the molecule of this hydrogen or changing the hydrogen, converting this hydrogen to other elements. So in the case of the annexes for this technical specification, there are some pathways for hydrogen production. Those are the electrolysis, steam methane reforming with carbon capture and storage, chlor-alkali co-production, steam cracking co-production, co-gasification with carbon capture and storage, biomass waste as feedstock for processes, and autothermal reforming with carbon capture and storage. And for the conditioning pathway, there's the liquid hydrogen, and for conversion pathway, there is the ammonia as hydrogen carriers and liquid organic hydrogen carriers. So this TS 19870, it was the first step. It was developed in 2023, and in 2024, the 19870-1 is being developed. So some of those annexes have changed a little bit. You will be able to see when it's published by ISO. Okay, so going to the scope of this technical specification, there are two possible approaches: the attributional and consequential approach. So the attribution approach is a snapshot of the environmental impacts, and it's strictly established inside the system boundary for the hydrogen supply chain. So for example, you have a plant producing hydrogen where you have the flows of raw materials and energy entering this plant, and you have the flows of emissions and co-products exiting this plant. So you can allocate all those emissions, distribute all those emissions to the different co-products without changing the system boundary. Whereas for the consequential approach, it is a much more broader concept in which you can expand the boundary of the system to add another specific process from another supply chain that would be relevant for your case. For example, hydrogen can be produced using municipal solid waste instead of letting this municipal solid waste decay in landfills. So this municipal solid waste can be added into the system boundary of the hydrogen, and this avoided methane emissions can also be plugged in into the system boundary of the hydrogen. So the consequential approach, the key word for the consequential approach is impact, and it's much used to assess public policies and the changes in different products and systems due to the introduction of the hydrogen system that you're studying. So going for the system boundary, well, as I mentioned, the system boundary for this work are direct and indirect emissions in the raw material extraction up to the consumption gate, including CAPEX emissions. So CAPEX emissions are emissions due to the production and transport of equipment used to produce hydrogen and produce the energy used for this hydrogen, unless they are proven insignificant due to the cutoff criteria that I'll go into a little bit later. And there are many possible delivery gates in this standard, this technical specification. So the last possible delivery gate is the consumption gate. This is where the final hydrogen arrives. But a delivery gate may be included after each one of those partial CFPs. For example, you can have a delivery gate, an imaginary delivery gate, at the end of the production section, at the end of the conditioning or conversion section. Then you can calculate the partial CFP for that specific stage using a module of this technical specification. So it's very versatile, it's very modular. And of course, the functional unit of the technical specification is 1 kilogram of hydrogen or hydrogen product, or when hydrogen doesn't exist. So for example, you converted hydrogen into ammonia. So for that specific delivery gate, the hydrogen product will be the functional unit at a pressure and purity required to the next stage in the supply chain. Okay, so for the environmental impact, of course, it is a CFP, so it has the climate change as the category for the environmental impact and uses the GWP 100 as the characterization factor expressed in kilograms of CO2 equivalent. It may use other GWP for other time frames and GTP, but only for reporting purposes. So the common, the standardized way to report those emissions is in GWP 100 for the TS. And the greenhouse gases considered are CO2, CH4, and N2O, unless they are used for the reporting of capital goods, in which other greenhouse gases may also be used according to the AR5, IPCC AR5, such as SF6, for example. And regarding the cutoff criteria, well, all efforts shall be made not to exclude any processes or any flows from the analysis, but they can be excluded if they are justified, and especially if they are properly documented. So if this flow or this process is justifiably immaterial, so it's negligible for the calculation, it can be excluded to simplify the calculations, providing that is properly documented, properly documentations to support it. Okay, so after setting the goals and the scope, we go to the second phase, that is the life cycle inventory analysis. So the life cycle inventory analysis, it quantifies the inputs and outputs associated with the product system. And the technical specification gives us some very good guidelines for the treatment of energy, feedstock, and transport services. So for electricity, for example, we do have the on-site electricity production. In the on-site electricity production, all the upstream emissions, they shall be accounted for. So for example, the upstream emissions to bring the fuel to the generator to produce this electricity, in case they exist, so that there may be some cases where it's not applicable. And of course, all direct emissions associated with the production of the electricity shall also be taken into account. And well, electricity can also be supplied from the grid. And in this case, there are two possible approaches. One is the first one is the attribution approach. and it can be done by using two methods. The first one is the location-based method. In the location-based method, it reflects the average emissions of the grid for one specific region, for example, region or country. And there's the market-based method. In the market-based methods, it uses some contractual instruments. We use the emission factor of some contractual instruments, such as the REC, the Renewable Energy Certificates, or the guarantees of origins. So this is for the attribution approach. And in the consequential approach, well, in the consequential approach, it is a more broad scope. So the emission factor that will be used will be the weighted emission of processes that are expected to respond to the change in this demand for electricity. So for example, you are pulling electricity from the grid in a place where this electricity is generated through different processes, different sources, and different technologies. And the impacts that you expect to be felt in the grid is the increase of all those different processes and sources. They have to increase to produce more electricity that you are extracting from the grid. So this offset, this emission factor of these weighted emissions, is what should be used for the consequential approach in this case. And of course, you can use the emission factor from a specific supplier under contractual arrangement, provided that they are produced in excess to what is delivered to the general market. So provided there is not double counting of those certificates. And then we get into the life cycle inventory analysis, the parts of the treatment of steam and natural gas. They are both treated very similar in the technical specification. They both can be supplied either as energy or as feedstock, and the emissions associated with the production and supply chain may be allocated to the co-products. The difference is that the steam can also be one of the co-products. So when that is the case, part of these emissions shall be allocated to it. And for natural gas, the section 4.3.2.5.4 provides very detailed guidance on how to assess the emission for this upstream natural gas. And it's based on, well, there are actually three different ways to do it, one having priority over the others, and it's based on the granularity of this emission factor. So more granular, more reliable that this information is, it has precedence over the others. And for the emissions in the transport sector, well, all vehicle and hub equipments that operate the transport sector shall have their emission accounted for. The TS has a detailed section on this. It includes all the emission for freight transport, external handling, and energy provision and leakages for the transport sector. So the next step, we go to carbon capture emissions. So all emissions associated from the process of capturing and storing this carbon, such as the electricity and the fuel used for the process of carbon capture, has to be considered in the inventory of emissions and has to be allocated to the different co-products. In the case of CCU, for example, there are two different methods two different approaches. For the attribution approach, no emissions associated with CCU will be taken into account, since the scope, the system boundary of the attribution approach doesn't count the utilization phase. But for the consequential approach, then this utilization phase may be brought into your original system boundary, and they may be accounted for in the different co-products. And emission allocations, of course, the TS 19870 brings a detailed decision tree algorithm for emission allocations. They must be allocated to the different co-products according to a clearly stated and justified allocation procedure. What I'd like to highlight here is that whenever possible, allocation should be avoided by doing subdivision or a virtual subdivision. And if it's not possible, and if it's consistent with the goal of the LCA of the CFP, then system expansion and substitution shall be used. If none of those are possible, then allocation shall be done to the different co-products using physical attributes such as their mass or their lower heating value. Okay, so We finish the second phase of the life cycle inventory analysis, and we start the life cycle impact assessment guidelines. So the life cycle impact assessment summarizes all the steps and all the work that has been done in the previous phases, and it aggregates and quantifies the data for all the stages under this assessment. So for each one of the stages, for the production, the conditioning, the conversion, and transport, uh, all the emissions, all the combustion emissions, fugitive emissions, industrial process emissions, energy supply emissions. This is the case, for example, for the treatment of electricity, and the upstream emissions will be summed up to compose the emissions inventory for that specific stage. And then after having all those emission inventories, production, conditioning, conversion, and transport, you sum all of them and have the total emission inventories for your whole assessed system, for your whole assessed supply chain. And after this third phase, we start into the interpretation phase, the fourth phase of the LCA. So the goal is to analyze the results from the CFP and identify issues and their conclusion. And based on these results, the goals and scope and definitions may be refined, because as I mentioned, it is a very dynamic process. It may be iterative. The calculations may have to be redone to make it more robust. And well, the TS brings a recommendation to prepare a life cycle assessment report. Life cycle assessment report is a comprehensive document to show the findings and the approaches that were used, the methodology that was used, the data quality criteria, the assumption and the limitations, among others, of this CFP study that is being proposed, and also indicates the possibility of performing a critical review. And a critical review, it's generally done by a third party, and it's important to bring transparency and credibility to the CFP study that was done. Okay, so for the next development in the ISO TS 19870, this is the first step of the methodology. The 19870-1 is under development, and it covers the hydrogen production stage. It's being under work for the year of 2024. And there will be the 19870-2, 3, and 4, and fourth. They will cover the other stages in the hydrogen supply chain. And of course, since this is the first step, the content of this document is subject to change based on future revisions of this technical specification. Thank you so much. I think that was it. I think I spoke a little bit too fast, but I hope it was understood. We still have some time for some Q&As. If you do have a question, please feel free to put them in the Q&A field, and we will gladly address it.
Gabriel, thank you so much for your presentation. If I may, just there is already a question in the Q&A section. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
And I see also Petra has her hand up.
Yeah, I see. What's the link between CBAN and this standard? Well, I think that this goes along with what we talked with Maximilian. The CBAN, it depends on European regulations, and regulations take precedence over international standards. That is the goal, to harmonize the different regulations by using this TS 19870. This is something that we are seeing happening in other parts of the world. But until it happens, this standard can be used as a benchmark for comparing different emissions from different hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives produced from different technologies. And yeah, it will depend on the national regulations for the CBAN, basically, until it's harmonized. I see a question by João Henrique. Oh, I'm sorry, Petra, do you have your hand up? Do you want to come in?
Yeah. Thanks, Gabriel. It was indeed quite fast. Let's be a bit pragmatic here. Let's see, one country comes to us and they want to develop the national standard in according with the ISO methodology. What would be the steps they need to take? What would you recommend?
Okay, well, there are different other sustainability criteria that can be used for certification schemes. Consider the greenhouse gases. I think that using the standard as the basis for their certification schemes, I mean, using the same way as calculating those emissions may be useful to make it harmonized for the international markets. And we see in the World Trade Organization on the agreements on technical barriers to trade that when international standards are in place and technical regulations are needed by a region, those technical regulations should use those international standards as their base. So this is something that would help promote the inter-barrier, the interchange trade between different regions, and maybe so it's basically using the same way to account for things, the same ways to report for those emissions.
Okay, thanks.
So I see another question from João Henrique. Is there any perspective to address e-fuels, e-methanol and e-SAF and e-ammonia? Well, ammonia is part of the annexes for hydrogen carrier. So this is a standard for hydrogen, not for hydrogen derivatives. But when considered and as a hydrogen carrier, ammonia is in one of the annexes. We don't have the annex for e-methanol yet or e-SAF, unless they are proposed to be used as hydrogen carriers, but so far we don't have those in mind, no.
There are a few more coming up. I don't know if you can see them.
No, they're not showing to me.
Okay, I can read them to you then. We just got one. How can we mitigate regulation and growth in addressing investor expectations?
I'm not sure if I understood the question. How can we mitigate regulation and growth in addressing investors' expectations?
I don't know. I cannot read the name of who posted the question. If you
Yeah, I can
they
see now.
want to,
It's
yeah.
Shinmoi. Yeah, I don't think I understood the question. If you want to maybe ask how this standard may help the growth in addressing the investor expectations or may help the growth of the investor expectations, I think that it is basically by bringing transparency and trust. This is a very transparent way of accounting for greenhouse gas emissions for different pathways and different technologies and inter-barrier trade. So I think that this is one of the ways to harmonize the hydrogen market. So maybe this is one of the most important ways to bring in investor trust for the hydrogen market. Yeah, I see a question by Emiliano Rossello. Attribution and consequential LCA will produce very different results for the LCA. You're right, Emiliano. The attributional is a normative for this standard, and consequential approach, attribution approach, and the consequential approach is informative. So what we wanted to do when developing this standard was to bring this aspect of the consequential approach to the ISO to help make it be developed. But you're right, the attribution approach is the main normative way of doing the LCA and the CFP, this standard. I see a question by Juan. What is the relation of the standards to global certification of hydrogen? Okay, so hydrogen certification is maybe one of the key aspects to foster the global trade of hydrogen, the mutual recognition of those certifications. So far, we have about 34 certification schemes for different hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, and making all of them talk to each other, it is a very daunting quest. So this technical specification comes as a way to harmonize it. So as of right now, it serves as an international benchmark for production, conversion, and conditioning from different technologies. And some countries that are developing their certification schemes, they can use this standard, they can use this technical specification as its basis. But the goal is to move forward to have a market harmonize it, even more harmonize it as the time goes by. And if there is an international certification scheme for hydrogen, it can use this international standard as its basis. I know that there's initiative on it going on between ISO and ICQ, and I think that this is very important for the growth of the market. Do you think we have time for one more, Margarita?
I think so, yes. A quick one.
Okay. There is a link between ISO TC 07 and ISO TC 197. This is a question by Belal from PSI. The ISO TC 197 is the hydrogen technologies in ISO. It is the main committee that deals with technology specifically for hydrogen, but many other technical committees also deal with matters that are important for the hydrogen value chain. So hydrogen is a very, very transversal matter in which many different standards from different other sectors may be applied to the hydrogen supply chain. So I can't find exactly which one is the TC 07, but if they have standards that may be applied to the hydrogen technologies, they probably have a link between them two. Yes.
I think Belal meant 207. There's another comment that just came after.
Environmental management. Yeah. Yeah, of course. So the 14067 and well, the 14,000 family, it was developed by the TC 207. Yeah, the ISO TS 19870 is based on the ISO LCA family of standards, including the 14,000 series. Yes.
And then maybe commenting on this, I see another question that is, which ISO was applicable for hydrogen GHG assessment prior to the introduction of this one, of ISO TC 19870?
Yeah, so the ISO 14000 family, it's applicable for products in general. So the ISO TS 19870 is a specific case tailored for the hydrogen supply chain.